Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. In our regular look at China's economic and geopolitical reach, there's always a lot to consider. Here to make sense of it all is our guest, Bill Reinsch. He is a senior advisor and Skoll Chair in International Business at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Washington, D.C. Welcome to our program.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be with you. It's an honor to be invited.
Well, it's an honor to have you, sir. I guess the first thing is a more general question. Maybe give us the latest assessment of China's current economic and geopolitical position.
Well, they see themselves as a rising power, and I think they've got a lot of evidence to support that. Although there's a lot of landmines out there that they're facing, they've handled COVID very aggressively, as you might say, with large-scale lockdowns that have caused a good bit of difficulty for their people. But they've saved a lot of lives that way, and their economy seems to be coming out of it fairly well. Exports are up. Growth was, I think, in the 6% range last year, which is good. I mean, the more mature economies like ours would kill for 6% growth. They have obstacles ahead, the biggest one being a demographic problem. They're aging fast, and their population growth is slowing down. And what that means is declining numbers of workers. Wages have been going up, and that poses a set of challenges for them. Their current leadership has been taking them away from a market economy toward more state control. We think that's bad economics and bad for growth. I think for them, it's a political thing. It's a matter of control. But I think they have a number of challenges in front of them. But so far, they've been doing very well. And in fact, if you look at Asia as a whole has been doing rather well.
Interesting. I've got to ask this question, too, because it's so topical. Obviously, at the margins of the opening ceremonies of the Beijing Olympics, Xi Jinping had his summit with Vladimir Putin. Looks like the Russia-China axis is on hyperspeed right now. What's your assessment?
Well, these things come and go. It was kind of a sort of the authoritarian summit, you might call it, and they're certainly, Xi Jinping anyway, is certainly trying to spread Chinese ideology globally. I mean, their argument is that what they do it better than democracy. Democracy doesn't work so well. It's not very efficient. I think it's on the West to disprove that. I'm a little skeptical of how long the Russia and China détente, if you will last. These are countries that have historically had a lot of antagonisms over the years. Even when they were both communist states in the 50s and 60s, they had a lot of difficulties. There's a long border, history of quiet conflict and mutual suspicion. They compete in Central Asia. They compete in other parts of the country as well. China has economic interests in Ukraine. So I think it's a marriage of convenience right now. I'm not sure how far it will go and how long it will last.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I guess I would like to know, given that situation, though, as it currently stands, do you think that the United States and the West are responding adequately to the challenge?
No, not really. And I think I can speak about Europe and the United States primarily. I think the United States is I think they understand what they need to do, but they're having trouble deciding specifically what steps to take. I think from President Biden's point of view, he looks at the relationship a little bit like running a marathon. And if you're running a marathon, there's only two ways to win. One is to run faster, and the other is to trip the other guy, which you don't do in a race. But in the world of international politics, tripping the other guy is okay. And so you have to have two strategies. And I think the Americans have figured out the running faster part. If you look at pending legislation in Congress, the Competes Act, or USICA, which is the Senate version, you can see that the government is prepared to put a lot of money into basically improving our competitiveness, bolstering innovation, helping our companies and staying in the private sector.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Bill Reinsch. He is a senior advisor and Skoll chair in international business at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Washington, D.C. We were just about to get into the topic of the U.S. response to the China competition, if you will, and you were going to talk a little bit about Congress. So please continue your thought on that.
I think that the Americans and the Europeans, to a lesser degree, have got the running faster part of the strategy down pretty well. They know that we have to up our competitive game, and they're prepared to put a good bit of money into that to do it. Congress is in the United States, as the House and the Senate now have both passed China bills. So they have to be reconciled into one, but I think that's going to happen. There are a lot of issues, a lot of details, but I think the direction is right. Where they're still struggling a little bit is the other part of the tripping the other guy part of the strategy. At one level, that the real competition with China going forward is going to be in other parts of the world. It's not going to be in China. It's going to be in Latin America. It's going to be in Africa. It's going to be in Europe. It's going to be in the Middle East, where we're going to go head to head with them. Their goal, off-stated in their 5-year plans, in their Made in China 2025 manuscript, is to create global champions in a range of, I think, 14 selected high-tech sectors. The US is the leader in a lot of those. So basically their ambitions would come at our expense. And it's really on us to do something about that. As I said, part of it is being more competitive. The other part is calling them out when they cheat, when they steal intellectual property, when they use massive subsidies which they're doing to attain their goals, when they force technology transfer from Western companies that are there, or otherwise discriminate against Western companies. Former President Trump tried to deal with that with tariffs, which is kind of a hit them in the face strategy and hope they fold, which didn't work. And the Biden administration are sort of stuck with the a landscape with a lot of potholes. So we've got phase 1 that fell short. We've got phase 2 negotiations that never took off. We've got a whole bunch of tariffs and a whole bunch of retaliatory tariffs, which have hurt us, have hurt them. And Biden's job is to kind of clean up the mess. And they're having a lot of difficulty figuring out what to do. He has very little room to maneuver. One of the Republican platforms already looking ahead to the 2024 election is that Democrats in general and Biden in particular are soft on China, are undermining our security. The president knows very well that any negotiation, anything he brings back is going to be criticized by the other party as too weak. I think that constrains them a little bit. I don't think they really want to have a negotiation right now because anything that he does will be treated as a failure here. I don't think the Chinese want to have one either because they know what will happen. Biden's demands will be the same as Trump's in terms of the unfair practices I just described. They said no to Trump. They're going to say no to Biden. I don't think they're very excited about going through all that again. So here we are, and right now the administration has taken sort of a safe road, which said, we're going to talk to the Chinese about their failure to meet their phase 1 obligations. And that's safe because they made promises and they didn't keep them.
Right.
So it's hard to criticize the government for going after them. At best, maybe something will come out of it. More likely, I think what we're doing is basically setting up a narrative to take further punitive action down the road, probably in the form of tighter export controls and possibly more tariffs in selected areas, although I don't think any of that's been decided.
What about more scrutiny for these tech transfers? Is that on the table?
Well, yes. One of the things that people that sort of looked in the weeds on this have noticed is that one of the things that Biden did not change from Trump were the expansions of export control and tech transfer policies that Trump put in. Those rules, the additional lists that questionable companies are put on, and rules that try to constrain exports, that's all still intact. We don't have any 3 a.m. tweets anymore, but we have a more rational process, but it's doing the same thing. There's been a decline in Chinese inbound investment into the United States anyway. You may have noticed the same thing in Canada, really a function of Chinese policy, not US policy. The issue that's being debated now in the US is whether the government should control outbound investment.
Right, right.
And ask our companies to be careful on where they're going to invest in China.
This is a blunt question and not very measured, but are we still in an economic and political competition with China, or is this another form of a Cold War?
I think it's becoming a Cold War. Both sides say not. Both sides say they don't want to force other countries to choose between. But in fact, both sides are pursuing policies that force countries to choose between them. It is becoming a sort of the authoritarians against the democracies. I mean, that's not good news. I wish it weren't that way, but that's the way we're going. I have to say, I think a considerable part of the blame for that falls on the Chinese. They're pursuing policies in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang province, with respect to Taiwan, in the South China Sea, that are aggressive and make a lot of other countries nervous. They're pursuing economic policies that, as I said earlier, are state controlled and moving away from market economics. And they are articulating a go it alone philosophy. Xi Jinping has been blunt about that. He said, the West is unreliable. We need to go it alone. That's a policy of separation. And here, the human rights activists are watching carefully. The people that are concerned about democracy in Hong Kong are watching carefully. There's a lot of pressure in the West to decouple, to pull apart. So, I mean, I have to say I'm a little gloomy about the trend of events. I mean, it's sand leaking out of the bag. It's not an abrupt severance, and companies will do what is in their interest to do. And if they have a substantial investment there and a substantial market there, they'll stay there. But I think increasingly they're looking at shortening their supply chains and going more regional, coming back to the Western Hemisphere. We're doing a study right now in the pharmaceutical sector on precisely that, nearshoring, looking at Canada, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil as options. So, I mean, companies will do what's in their interest, and the United States government is not telling them, to leave, but the political risk of doing business in China has gone way up. And I think you're going to see gradual separation over time.
It seems that the Biden administration has received that message as well. There's a number of executive orders about supply chain, pharmaceutical, semiconductors, rare earth elements. That seems to be one of the things that is driving U.S. policy right now, yes?
Yes, that's right. I think the issue in the end will be how they define national security. There's not a lot of controversy about the sectors you just mentioned: critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, chips, rare earths, things like that. That is, most people agree that those have security implications. The thing to watch is that later this month, at least that's the deadline, there are 6 other studies of US economic sectors that are due to be released, and they're much bigger. They're bigger sectors: agriculture, transportation, energy, the defense industrial base. Those are the 4 I remember. Together, they're 60% of our GDP. If we start defining all of those things as essential to our security, you're talking about major changes in the way our economy is structured. I don't think they'll go that far. I think if you look at the last administration, if you were Peter Navarro, everything is related to security. I think for the Biden folks, it's going to be narrower than that. But in the end, they have to define that. They have to say what is important and what is not important. And we can't make everything. That's the reality.
Yeah, so that obviously supply chains are still going to have a global element, but you see some of them shortening to more nearshoring when it comes to national security.
Yeah, that was happening anyway. That was even happening before Trump. I think companies were worried about volatility in transportation prices. They were worried about political risk in some countries, China being the main one, but not the only one. And a lot of them simply wanted to be near their customers. They were running into quality issues. And there's been an effort for, oh, I don't know, 6 or 7 years to take a look at supply chains. And COVID speeded all that up because what we learned from COVID is that we ran out of stuff and we didn't have everything we needed right when we wanted it. And the message to supply chain managers has been resilience. Don't just think about price, quality, and delivery. You have to think about not putting all your eggs in a single basket. And that pushes companies to diversify.
Right.
And the main place they're diversifying is really to shorten their supply chains and move back to this hemisphere.
We're going to take a little bit more of a break. I apologize, Bill. We'll be right back with you. Stay with us after these messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Bill Reinsch. She is a senior advisor and Skoll Chair in International Business at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Washington, D.C. Bill, love to get your take. You touched on it a little bit. We were touching on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and so on, but Taiwan, obviously looming large these days. Also, people are looking at Taiwan at the same time they're looking at the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Is there a correlation there? I'd love to get your insights into this.
Well, I hope there's not a correlation. A lot of people have noticed the similarities. I think from the United States perspective, there's a difference. We have treaty obligations with Taiwan that we do not have with Ukraine. So I think the U.S. response, if there actually were an invasion of Taiwan, would be certain and determined and aggressive. We have a very strong commitment to Taiwan. That said, I'm not overly worried about that in the short run. I think it's not in the Chinese government's interest to do things that would be economically destructive in Taiwan. The actual, both of them have significant economic relations with each other. There's a lot of Taiwanese companies producing in China. That's gotten a little more difficult, but they're kind of entwined. And if the Chinese were to take some aggressive actions that would be disruptive, it would do significant damage, I think, to both economies. Nobody wants that, and I hope that won't happen. I don't think what's going on between Russia and Ukraine by itself provides an excuse. There would have to be some other event in Asia, and there's always, what we call in Washington the black swan possibility. The collision of two ships in the Taiwan Strait that escalates. I hope we can all avoid that, but I don't think conflict is inevitable by any means.
It seems like U.S. foreign policy, though, is successfully doing this pivot to Asia. This was long talked about by President Obama, for instance, but with the AUKUS agreement and with all of the focus on East Asia and fighting some of the negative aspects of China's rise, it looks like this seems to be this century's big competition. Is that right?
Well, I think so. It's as my CSIS colleague Scott Miller has said from time to time, it's kind of hunting where the ducks are. The engine of global growth is in Asia. The most dynamic economies are in Asia. Not just China, but if you look at if you look at Indonesia, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at Singapore, Malaysia, also Japan and Korea, Australia and New Zealand. These are all economies that are experiencing a good bit of dynamism, and I think it's natural for the United States, Canada too, because we are both Pacific countries as well as Atlantic countries, to look in both directions. So I don't think it's unusual. The challenges are getting greater. U.S. policy, really since 1945, has been, well, even before that, has been to prevent single power hegemony in Asia. For a long time, that meant Japan. I think now it means China. I don't think U.S. policy has ever been American hegemony. It's been balance. And I think that's been welcomed by the smaller nations in Asia, who've had thousands of years of dealing with China and know how to do that. But they welcome another large power coming in and saying, Asia should be for the Asians, all of them, and not just Asia for the Chinese. So we're there. The trick for Biden is how to convince the Asians that we mean it and we're going to stay there. And the missing piece is the economic piece, which is what we've been talking about.
Sure. I'm afraid our time is up. Bill Reinsch, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. A lot of great insights there. I hope we can have you back at some point. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting insights from Bill Reinsch there out of Washington, D.C. About China's rise and how to meet it for the U.S. and its allies as well. Thanks for watching today.